someone had asked me whether I would write an opera, I would have laughed, because operas were old museum pieces. That was my perception, or they were big populist spectacles, with elephants, and or they were playgrounds for the rich and powerful. This is San Francisco Opera Ball. This is a great set of graphs that Subi Raman did. This is the timeline from the late 19th century to now, the percentage of performances of operas composed within 25 years of that date. So at the end of the 19th century, it was basically half, and then it quickly dropped down to 0, and it just stayed there. Sorry, the Metropolitan Opera. And if you look at the median year of opera composition over that same period, it basically is just completely flat. It's actually at about 1870, which is Aida, the picture I showed you. This wasn't very exciting to someone who wanted to break into this world. And famously, one of the high modernist composers of the last century, Pierre Boulez, when asked about opera houses, he said, "Opera houses, blow them up." Oh. And this got him a visit from the Swiss anti-terrorist police after 9/11, actually. He was 70 years old at that point. Okay, but there was a parallel development of opera that wasn't in the big opera houses. You had, for example, Kurt Weill's three-penny opera, called an opera, but didn't use opera singers, was not an opera house, definitely had a point of view that maybe wasn't favorable to the rich and powerful. You had Virgil Thompson, Gertrude Stein's Four Saints in Three Acts, a very nonlinear and non-narrative libretto. Also an all-black cast, which you never, of course, would have at the Metropolitan Opera at that time. And also on Broadway, not in a big opera house. And then post-war, you had a whole explosion of interesting mixes of music and theater. I'm just picking things at random here, but John Cage and Marcel Duchamp playing a game of chess, and the chessboard is wired to sound, and it's generating the score as they play this game. And then I had this experience. I was a typical modernist composer when I was young. I grew up in the middle of this, writing music that was very difficult to play, and most people thought it was difficult to actually listen to. And after I graduated from college, I went over to a friend's house, and he had just gotten this 4-album set of Robert Wilson and Philip Glass's Einstein on the Beach. And when I was 20, I seemed to have all the time in the world, so of course I just sat down and we listened to the whole thing. And it was definitely it had a big impact on me. It was immediate, it was tonal, it was really rhythmic, it used rock instrumentation, but it also had these really interesting theatrical elements. So when I went to graduate school and I studied music and electrical engineering as well, here at Berkeley, in fact. And I was doing computer music and so on, but this idea that I would be doing theater just kept bouncing around in my head. And eventually, I just found that I was in the middle of writing this opera. And I'm going to just play. This is based on a Max Ernst story, The Painter. It's about a young girl who has a dream. She's going to join a convent in the morning, and she has a dream the night before. And it's all about the patriarchy, and mixes the priesthood and her father, and the loss of her hair, and her budding sexuality. And in the end, she actually rejects the church for earthly love, which maybe resonated with some things that happened in my youth as well. So I actually don't know how to, there we go. So we'll just listen to it.
The Whopper will remember the shameful year 1930. The year it would have liked to have seen all the cathedrals of the universe parade in far too short dresses. It will remember, above all, a certain night because... On Good Friday night of the shameful year 1930, a child, hardly 16 years old, dipped her 2 hands into a sewer, pricked her skin, and with her blood traced these lines. and theatrical sacrifice.
Okay, so you get the idea. And just to show you a little bit of a very different production that was done in Austria, a German language production of the same piece. Opera is kind of an interesting Okay. So these are both very successful productions, and we had big audiences, we were sold out, we had to add performances, turn people away, and good critical reviews, and there's nothing like adulation to make you feel like you're on the right path. So I quickly started writing some other pieces, the one that Piero mentioned, Su Ponte Pilato, which was a big, sprawling, epic piece that was written in a whole bunch of different languages, and it was about the death and resurrection of Pontius Pilate. And also a more intimate piece called Queer that was based on William Burroughs' autobiographical novel of the same name about his time when he was in Mexico City. He basically had to escape from some difficult drug charge situation, and he fell in love with this other young man. It was a terrible, actually a very sad love story. And but around the same time, had been working with this choreographer named Robert Wexler here in San Francisco, and speaking of having to escape the country, he was funding his dance company by getting more and more credit cards and just maxing them out. And at some point, he realized that was not a very sustainable business practice, and so he left to go to Europe, and he landed in Nuremberg, and he met this engineer named Frieder Weiss, who wanted to work on some interactive dance setups. And we worked on a number of pieces together, and it culminated in this one work called Blinde Liebe, which is a tragic work about this young couple that committed a murder. They were juveniles, and they thought the guy had money, but he had no money, and it was just pointless. And we set up this system. So this was like in the the late 90s. We had the system that would had a number of cameras that would watch the dancers, and the dancers would be wearing different outfits, and so you could track them separately, and based on their position and their velocity and acceleration or movement or distance or whatever you wanted, you could produce signals that would control the sound. And sometimes, and we did a lot of different things. Sometimes we would have them actually generate the sound directly, like they were playing instruments kind of in the air. Sometimes it would just alter a pre-recorded, or it's not a pre-recorded, but a pre-composed score. Like as the dancers would move quickly, maybe they would affect the instrumentation, something like that. And we had a lot of fun with it. And we did some huge pieces where like we had this marathon runner controlling the lights, and we had MIDI-controlled pipe organs and all this stuff. This is, Germany, where there's money for the arts. And, but it was unsuccessful in some ways. It's funny, audiences had a difficult time getting the mapping from the dancers' movements to the sound. Sound is a very subtle thing. I mean, it kind of hits below your intellectual brain for a lot of people, and so it was difficult to get. And so Frieder started working on other things that other systems that worked with video, so translating motion into video. And I was commissioned to do a piece, a solo opera for a friend of mine, John Dykers, an opera singer, a tenor. And Frieder and I set up this system where we were using an infrared light source by that point, because that would allow you to change the lights. You could have the lights completely off, and the camera could still track the performer. And then there was a front projector and projectors behind, and so this system could also track the performer and generate images, in this case, that would be projected back onto the performer. And they also had some audio processing as well. This piece was a strange story. It's about this Victorian gentleman that has a woman's face on the back of his head. It's his sister. He hears it speak to him. And of course, in typical opera fashion, it all ends in tragedy and death and suicide. And so. But he had to perform both his own voice plus his sister's voice. So I wrote this gender-changing software that he could control. And I'll show you a little bit, just so you get the idea of what this is. So we're looking from the side. The audience would actually be looking more straight on, but some things were scored, and some things he could change himself by the way he sang, and so on, and by his movements. But
that's cool.
Yeah. Woo! I mean, a lot of this is Frieder's work too, and Frieder's actually become, and this kind of thing has become much more common since then. A lot of people are doing it, and other people were doing it at the time as well. Frieder's done a bunch of things, even on essentially like Broadway shows and such, other operas, and he did the most successful things are these dance pieces he's done. Where one thing about video, it's hard to mix video and live. Some people do it well because video, of course, is flat and live is not. But so he'll do things where essentially he's made it into a two-dimensional piece. So there's a projector from above, and as the dancers move through the space, they can change it. There's also ones where they can spray great rays off themselves and so on. But I have done less with the technology since then. I like live, and I like people to. I do a lot of chamber pieces where you really are right there with the performers, and it's hard to mix video in that, especially like if you're in the round or something like that. Even speakers. This last piece was an electroacoustic. I mean, it was just all electronic piece. So it was just speakers, and that also is not so thrilling to me. I like the whole social aspect of music making as well. So I've gone back to primarily doing non-technological works. I thought I'd show you a little bit of a fairly recent piece. Starting to enjoy it. So this was this took a story. God, these are all like tragic stories. This was a woman in Oakland who was told by God to kill her 3 children. This happened in 2006 or so. And she took her kids to San Francisco and threw them off at Pier 7. And the story kind of bounced around in my head for a long time. I had this religious upbringing as well. And religious faith is very appealing. It's really seductive. It gives you a certainty about the world. But I wanted to show that was true. I understood her attraction to that, but that always also unquestioning religious faith also has these dangers. So let's just listen to one little section of this just to give you an idea. Okay. Yeah, it's funny, you know, when you work on stuff, you get, yeah. You know, you get caught up in all the production aspects and, you know, who's going to get paid and where you're going to, why the flame retardants are late and all that. But then I'd actually sit there and watch it and people would be crying and I say, oh, that's right.
Yeah.
And then actually last year I did a piece that was much lighter. This is the dominatrix Stalin here with her foot on the chest of this Russian writer from the 30s. There was a bunch of Russian stories from that period. It was funny, but of course it didn't end very well because being an avant-garde artist in the Soviet Union in the 30s was not a great career choice. So anyway, just to come full circle, I started with this anti-opera screed, but obviously I've thrown myself into it, and nowadays everything has changed. Every young composer wants to write operas. They're always asking me how to raise money and how I do it and where to find people. Basically, everyone is writing operas. It's a renaissance of the art form, I think. And I think that's it. That's it.